I have been tracking my happiness on a scale from 0 to 10 for every 15-minute interval of my life since January 1st, 2018. And when it was 4 months in, I loved seeing the responses because people thought it was really cool. They'd be like, wow, you've been tracking your happiness. That's so cool. And now that it's 4 years in, it's kind of more of a range. It ranges anywhere from you are incredible to are you okay? And I'm fine. I'm hanging in there. But the question that I usually get after that is what prompted me to start tracking my happiness? And I want to say it was some big life moment or discovery that made me say, I'm going to start tracking my happiness. But the short answer is that I'm crazy. So here is a little timeline of what I've been tracking. So starting off with my happiness, I started my senior year of high school, and that was in January 2018. And I used a calculator today. That is 1,578 days that I had since I started as of April 28th, 2022. So it's been a while. So if you ever want to know how I felt on September 23rd, 2019 at 4:15 p.m., just let me know. I could probably get that number for you. But essentially when I started, I just wanted to be able to visualize my life. If you ever heard of Year in the Life of a year in pixels, it's a way that people can visualize their entire year by coloring in that day. That's what I wanted to do, but with numbers. I have such a data-driven approach where if I had to just do one mood for that day, that wouldn't be good enough for me. I want to have an actual number. I am a solid 7 today. I'm a solid 2 and be able to track that and see that over time. And when I started in January 2018, it actually was a total of 3 times a day I would track it. I had a morning rating, an afternoon rating, and an evening rating. And then I realized my mood changes too much. And then by week 3, that's when it became 15-minute intervals. It went to hours and then went to 15 minutes and then it just never stopped. So my friend once asked me, oh, are you going to start doing it by the minute? I'm like, I'm not that crazy, but I have been doing it for 15-minute intervals. So. And then a few months in, I was talking to a friend of mine in my AP chemistry class, and I was describing to her, I was like, yeah, sometimes I feel completely fine, but I have this pain inside of me and I don't know why it's there. And then she looked at me real closely and said, honey, that's anxiety. And ever since that moment, I have been keeping it. A month after that, I started keeping track of my anxiety separate of my happiness because I realized that I was combining the two of them in my head, even though they were two totally different factors. Some things that, while they're interrelated to each other, you can't have them. Because you could be anxious and happy, and you could be anxious and unhappy. So by keeping track of them separately, it really gave me a basis for what I could track. And what I like to describe as anxiety is something that everyone feels. If you ever leaned a little too far back in your chair and then you see your life flash before your eyes, imagine that feeling, except it just doesn't end. That's what I usually like to describe as anxiety. And then January 2019, I was like, I'm going to start keeping track of my food. I wanted to see how much sugar am I eating? How much sodium am I eating? And slowly and steadily, I just continued to add on more and more on top of that ever since. To where now I keep track of fruits and vegetable intake, dairy intake, meat intake, anything under the sun in terms of food. And then it took me a while, but then around April 2000, it was the early 2021, I was looking at my data and I had all this visualizations for my life over time, but I wanted to make the findings. I had all the ideas in my head. I knew that coffee could make me sleepy if I do this certain thing, and how spending time around this person makes me happy, but then spending time around that person, like, oh, keep me away from them. But I wanted to be able to quantitatively say, by doing this, that affects my happiness. So then I created a questionnaire for myself. And I started asking myself that questionnaire every day, on top of my food, on top of my anxiety, on top of my happiness, on top of everything else. And I incorporated that into my daily tracking. I also journal every day. I've been doing that since January 1st, 2018. I can't just have a day full of numbers and not know what I did. But I have to say, one of the primary effects of journaling every day is that now whenever I'm on planes, I've gotten 3 separate times in my life now, people in the seat next to me ask me if I'm writing a novel, because for 4 years of typing, you get really good at it. So this is essentially the question I'm trying to answer. If you think about the last 3 years, if you had to pick one month in those 3 years in which you felt the most happy, why did you feel that happy? A lot of people can't really answer that question. You could think of little reasons. Maybe it was the weather, maybe it was the people you're around or the things that you were doing. But if everything else can be so quantified in science, why can't happiness be quantified? And that's the thing I want to figure out is what are those factors that lead to well-being and how can you recreate those factors in your life in order to get to optimal well-being? So here's the basis that I'm going off of my findings. So for a while, it was just my personal observations. Like I said before, when I was going in, because by keeping track and paying attention to how you feel for every 15-minute interval of your life, you start to pick up on a few things about how certain things make you feel. So that was a lot of the basis of my findings. And then I was able to use that to do a linear regression analysis. So I did that at the end of 2021 using that beautiful questionnaire I created to figure out which of those factors that I was tracking were statistically significant in being able to predict my happiness for that day. I even created a model that has, if you're familiar with statistics, an R-squared value of 0.87 with 13 different factors, where if I answered 13 different questions, then with a 87% accuracy, I could predict what my quantitative happiness will be for that day. So my goal is to sort of work on that questionnaire and be able to limit it down to things that you can actively control and improve in order to enhance your overall well-being. And lastly, positive psychology. So this is sort of a recent development within the past 25 years or so, with the exception of Abraham Maslow. And positive psychology is, so one of the songs I was playing before is called Way Less Sad by AJR. And in the song, he's talking about, I'm not happy yet, I'm just way less sad. That's the whole purpose of positive psychology, is a lot of psychology is focused on getting up to a certain point. And then once you reach that certain point, then a lot of it's like, okay, you're fine now. But you might be way less sad, but how do you go above that? How do you achieve that happiness and reach those optimal levels of well-being? And there is plenty of books. I spend my long car rides listening to audiobooks, and the little free time that I do have, I do read journal articles on this stuff as well because it's something I'm interested in. But take these three things together, and this is what I have for the basis of the findings that I have. So I have the quantitative aspect, the literature aspect, and as well as all of my personal observations from just paying attention every 15-minute interval of my life. So starting off with the first factor, we have this physiological needs and safety. So talking about Abraham Maslow, he is essentially the founder of positive psychology. He created a hierarchy of needs of, by achieving these needs and going up this pyramid, you meet the basic standards for human needs. And at the bottom two levels is physiological needs and safety. So I don't know about you, but if I go too long without eating, I get very hangry. And no matter how many interventions I could do to improve my happiness, if I'm not fulfilled with my hunger, or if I'm in a room that's too cold, then it's kind of hard to reach those higher aspects of it as well. And this is something I especially noticed is a lot of times people will look at my graphs for the years and be like, oh, wow, the end of January was really bad. Yeah, well, I was sitting in bed with the flu for 5 days. So that could be a strong reason why. So by meeting your physiological and safety needs, that sort of founds the basis of what I found to be one of the factors that contributes to overall well-being. Next, we have energy and exhaustion. So this isn't too heavy in the literature that I was reading about how this affects your happiness and overall well-being, but through my linear regression analysis and definitely my personal observations, if I do not have the energy to take on the day, or if I just feel exhausted, or something that I'm very interested in studying is the midday dip. You know, when you wake up, you're feeling good, you're getting your work done, and then whatever time comes, and then you just feel tired. You're sitting in a meeting, and then next thing you know, you're laying on the floor in between that 5-minute meeting that you have for your internship because you just do not want to stay awake. But what are the things that cause it? A lot of the research out there talks about circadian rhythms and all that. But as you probably know, you probably don't get that midday dip every single day. So why does it happen some days, but not on other days? So that is one of the things I'm interested in researching, because it does have a major impact on how your overall well-being is, especially from day in and day out, because if you don't have that energy, that's hard to tackle those other aspects. And through that linear regression analysis as well, I looked at the consistency in my sleep habits, whether it be the amount of time, the time that I went to bed or the amount of sleep that I got each night. And I compared that to how exhausted I feel. It was one of those questions on my questionnaire, and it actually had no significant impact. So it's kind of interesting how it worked out like that. I'm still in the process of trying to figure out what are those factors that cause energy and exhaustion dips. Next, I'm talking about anxiety. I'm from the state of New York, but sometimes I felt like I lived in a state of constant anxiety. So as I mentioned before, anxiety, imagine your chair about to tip over, but that feeling just doesn't end. It might last for 15 minutes, it might last for 1 minute, or it might last for 3 months, you know? But something I noticed about anxiety is that there's a big difference between watching Finding Dory and getting rejected from a job. When you're watching Finding Dory, you might be bawling your eyes out from sadness. Sadness is not the equivalent of unhappiness. My scale measures happiness. 10 is extremely happy, 0 is extremely unhappy. But sadness doesn't fall within that range as well. And anxiety encompasses a lot of those aspects as well. So from my findings, I have discovered the secrets to overcoming anxiety, or at least as much as you could. And this is the habits that have worked for me and the things that I've been tracking. So if you're in search of immediate relief, to get my anxiety from a 10 to a 7, I usually talk to someone that I enjoy talking to. I don't talk to someone I don't enjoy talking to. That might make it worse. But that brings it from a 10 to a 7, 10 to a 5, eating something. Chocolate. Not sure what it is in chocolate, but if my anxiety is at a 10, it brings it to a 5. Bringing it from a 10 to a 3, another thing I'm really interested in is studying the effect of temperature and body temperature and how that affects your overall well-being. Showering or exercise, it might have something to do with the heart rate or your body temperature, but that would consistently always bring my anxiety from a 10 to about a 2 or a 3. But 10 to a 0, attack it at the source. So it might sound pretty obvious, but a lot of times when I'm going through days in which I have anxiety, I'm not exactly sure what caused that anxiety. I have to do a lot of reflection and think back to what in that day caused me to feel the anxiety that I'm feeling. And if I have control over it and I minimize it, then that could bring my anxiety from a 10 to a 0. So a good example is last year when I was taking classes at a university in South Africa, one of my exams was 40% of my overall grade. It was quite delightful. It was the midterm exam. And I studied for weeks. I absolutely crushed it. The mean score was a 44 and I got a 32. And it was 40% of my grade. Yeah, it was a good time. It was a good time. And when we asked the professors, can you give a curve? They said no, because you all didn't study hard enough. The class of 180 students with a mean score of a 44. It's us that didn't study hard enough. But at that moment, I was nervous because in order to continue with transferring my credits back to Virginia Tech, in order to continue onwards with graduating in time and everything falling in the place that I needed to pass that class. So then I did a deep dive into all the options that I had, and I found out I was able to enroll in that same class at Virginia Tech over the summer and take it virtually. So even though I had to pay for taking the class at Virginia Tech and in South Africa, not having that anxiety looming over my head for the next 2 months of how I need to get an 80% on this exam to pass, that was well worth it. And it brought my anxiety immediately from a 10 to a 0. But not everything can be in your control, because while that was an example of something I can control, there have been instances in my life where it's not control. And that's where time comes into play. It's the worst solution that there is out there. I would rather just eat chocolate and have my anxiety go from a 10 to a 0. But if you don't have that control over what the anxiety producer is, then time, without a doubt, will hopefully bring it down. But here is another interesting finding as well, is the concept of meditation. Because when I started tracking my happiness and I started noticing the days in which I would have anxiety, I would always hear, oh, just take some deep breaths and then all your anxiety will go away. That can be a load of baloney. Because because meditating is like exercising. It's something you have to train your brain to do. You can't go to the gym on day one and lift 100 pounds. You have to work towards it. And meditating is essentially that same aspect. You don't fall in love with someone by meeting with them for 5 minutes a day, every day for a month. You have to dedicate the time to it. You have to put in the effort, and you have to rewire your brain in order to reap the effects of it. A lot of studies done with beginner meditators do not get nearly the same effects out of that meditation as they do as the advanced meditators. And by training your brain to meditate, then when instances occur that are anxiety producing, it doesn't affect you in the same way that it does compared to those that don't have that anxiety, to those that don't have those meditative practices. And it also has a big effect on how you handle all other aspects of your life right now. And another interesting thing too is they looked at a Buddhist monk, and they claim that he is the happiest individual in the world. They did brain scans on him, looking at how he has the highest capacity for happiness in his brain. When they did the study, he was 40 years old, and he had the brain scans of a 30-year-old. So meditation does have profound impacts on your brain. And if you train yourself to use it effectively, the same way that you would go to the gym, then you could reap those effects and those benefits. Next in the findings is relationships. So a lot of times I hear, it's not the job that I love, it's the people that I work with. Whether it be your classes that you're taking or the meetings that you have or just the organizations that you're in, a lot of times it's not even the aspects of what you're doing that brings the joy for it. A lot of times it's the people that you're surrounded by. One of the factors from my questionnaire was time spent around one or two or more individuals who I really enjoy, somewhat enjoy, or neutrally enjoy, or don't enjoy at all. And by spending time around people who you really enjoy, that has a major effect on how your overall well-being is overall. This could be friends, family, or even the potential person working the drive-thru at Starbucks. So again, being surrounded by people you love and support time and time again is such a major factor for being able to predict your overall well-being for a day. And now I want to talk about dosages too, because this can change by individual. I noticed that a lot of the individuals I spend my time around with, they have certain dosages in my mind. So while some friends might have a lower dosage, some might have a higher. A good example of this is my older sister. So my sister has a relatively good dosage, but when it was March 2020 and she turned my laundry room into her walk-in closet for 2 months, that dosage would get exceeded most of the days that I was there with her. And that just goes to show that you need to be conscious of the time that you spend around people. If I ever go on vacations with people, then I make sure I have my alone time, for example, because as much as I love spending time around those people, by spending too much time around someone, and everyone has that dosage of how much time you can spend around them, that has an effect on overall well-being. So as for future research with this, I want to look into what causes the difference between someone that you're spending time with that you really enjoy versus somewhat enjoy. Because something that I noticed too is that while I may be enjoying my time with my sister somewhat on some days, other days I'm having the greatest time like sitting and chatting with her. And what are the reasons for those causes? So that's one of the factors I want to look forward to in the future. Next, we have gratitude. So I was thinking about this last week. It was about a 55-degree day and it was very windy. But after the weekend of it feeling like summer, it did not feel very nice at all. If you were to take that same day and put it in January, I would be wearing shorts. I would have my windows open. I would be going to Starbucks and getting myself an iced coffee. Life would be good. But it's different. Even though it's the same exact weather, it feels different because of gratitude. Because you're more grateful for it in January when you're not used to it. And it sort of ties into the concept of hedonic adaptation. Another example of this I noticed a lot is with showering. So the fall of my junior year, I lived in my car and I drove around the East Coast. I went to Panera Bread's for my internship to use the Wi-Fi there, get some coffee, and then I would sleep in free campsites at night. free campsites at night. I didn't have access to a shower. So whenever I would visit my friends, whether it be every like 4 or 5 days, and I would use their shower, those 15-minute intervals I looked at for the entire year of 2020, those 15 minutes when I would be in that shower for that one time of the week were some of the happiest moments I had for the entire year. I noticed that same thing a year later with that. And even if it's just, if I had to sleep on the floor for 4 days, that 5th day where you're laying in your nice warm bed, you just feel so grateful for it and happy. Gratitude is such an important facet when it comes to well-being and happiness. And a lot of it can be internal, but a lot of it can be external as well. Everything that I described is factors that you can do a hedonic reset, where maybe you could take a cold shower for 5 days, and then on that 6th day, that hot shower, that will feel very good. So it's little things like that. Maybe instead of eating out every night, you could eat healthy a few nights a week and work on looking forward to that one thing during the week, because then it hits in all the right ways. But there is another way to train your brain in order to make it more internal and less external, because more external in terms of that hedonic adaptation, where you are not presenting yourself with a shower, for example, to make that shower even better. Another way that you could do is to train your brain for gratitude. So a study done on college students determined the concept of the Tetris effect. The Tetris effect came from a study where they gave college students for 8 hours a day, they were playing Tetris nonstop. Day in, day out, they were just paid to sit, play Tetris, and that's all they would do. But the purpose of the study wasn't to track them playing Tetris. It was to see how that affected them out of playing Tetris. And everywhere those students went, they would see Tetris everywhere they went. They would look at buildings. They would see how the buildings could interline with each other. A lot of them reported having dreams where there was Tetris blocks in it. And the reason why I bring this up is because let's say that you write down 5 things that you're grateful for every day. Every morning you're like, I'm grateful for this, I'm grateful for this, and you just go through it. By training yourself to focus on what you're grateful for, you find yourself noticing that you're applying those same concepts even when you're not playing Tetris, when you're just walking about. You pay more attention to the things that you're grateful for. So it's little activities such as that to increase your overall gratitude and have an effect on your overall well-being. So now 6 of 8, we have emotional variability. So a few quotes that really stuck out with me in terms of this is, the first one is, when we numb the pain, we numb everything else too. And then the next one is from a show that I was watching a few months ago. And in it, they said, you feel a lot, which means sometimes you're going to hurt a lot, but it also means that you're going to live a life that is emotionally rich and really beautiful. So growing up, I hated scary movies. When I was 15 and I watched Interstellar, I did not sleep for a week. Is Interstellar a scary movie? No, it's really not that scary of a movie. But for 15-year-old Kevin, and then what happened a few months ago is I was watching a movie with some people, and then as I was actually writing it in my journal about what the movie was about, I was like, wait a second, that was a horror movie. I watched an entire horror movie and did not realize it was a horror movie. And a lot of that is because it goes to show that you're desensitized to a lot of things. And you notice it a lot as you get older, because they have movie ratings for a lot of movies that are deemed inappropriate for kids. And that's because kids are more sensitized to a lot of things around them. And we talk about sensitization a lot, because if you think of veterans coming back from war and who have PTSD, they have to go through desensitization therapies in order to help with their PTSD symptoms. But what about on the flip side of that? What if you're too desensitized to everything, where moments of joy don't feel as joyful as they could, and even though moments of negativity don't feel as negative as they could? How do you combat that? And that's when I like to bring up to the concept of sensitization. It doesn't really exist, but I think about it a lot because they do have something similar to it, where marriage counseling is a good example of it, is where 2 people going for marriage counseling, they use sensitization techniques in order to rebuild that bond. But you could take that concept, even something such as classical conditioning, by training yourself, maybe every time that I go to this place and I feel happy, I could take a sip of green tea. And the next thing you know, you associate green tea with that feeling of feeling happy. And then by sipping green tea, you just immediately feel happy. A lot of it is done with dog studies, and that's what they all come out with as well. But essentially, some parts of desensitization are good. Because if I was riding Jungle Cruise at Disney and I was fearing my life for an alligator coming after me, I wouldn't be laughing at the jokes of the ride operator. But if your entire life feels like a theme park ride where you feel things, but it doesn't have the same effect on you, then that has an effect on overall well-being. And this is something that I learned with my linear regression analysis as well, is by having those highs, and even if those lows are there, just by having that variability rather than the lack of variability, that has a major effect on overall well-being. So being able to figure out how to get to that higher variability is something of research interest to me as well. And one other thing I want to bring up as well is what I call the blank space effect. So if you know the song Blank Space by Taylor Swift, that was my jam when it came out. 2014, Kevin was in the back of the car, such a good song. However, every grocery store you go into, they'd be playing Blank Space. Everywhere you go, any event, everything, I always heard Blank Space. And all those positive memories I had of listening to Blank Space was replaced by neutral memories. And a neutral memory is still a memory. And any neutral association with it begins to replace that. So one recommendation I have is, if you have a positive memory, if you have a song that you associate with something or a favorite movie, savor it. Instead of using it when you're in a neutral mood, by savoring it, if you watch your favorite movie once a year, then it could still retain that status of your favorite movie a lot easier than if you were watching that movie every day. Number 7. So I've never been much of a singer, but if you know me, I do like from Bohemian Rhapsody to Kelly Clarkson to Olivia Rodrigo. I do enjoy singing a lot. And so looking back to my 11th grade, I was on my high school swim team. And the county that I'm from in New York has about 1.4 million people, so quite a lot. And at our swimming counties, I asked my high school swim coach if I could sing the national anthem. I never had much singing experience. Probably wouldn't sound very good, but it just seems so unreal and something that I just really wanted to do. And he said, I wouldn't want to do it, but I mean, sure, why not? I'll give them your name. And so then on February 11th, 2017, that is exactly what I did. I sang the national anthem in front of, it's probably about like 4,000, 5,000 people in a aquatic center. And that was one of my optimal days for my entire life. And why I bring that up is because that feeling of accomplishment, whether it be something getting done that you never thought possible that you would ever be able to get done, or even just that assignment or project that's hanging over your head for months, and then you finally find a day to work on it, utilizing your strengths in the way that you didn't know that you could utilize your strengths, and finding meaning and being accomplished and feeling proud of yourself for what you get done, that has such a major effect on overall well-being and achieving that optimal well-being. And finally, we have anticipation. So when I was little, my favorite, one of my favorite songs was Friday by Rebecca Black. And before you could do the math, I was actually 13, so I wasn't that little. But the reason why I bring it up is because in the song, she talks about it's Friday, gotta get done on Friday. Everyone's looking forward to the weekend, because that's the feeling of Friday. It's the weekend's here, even though you do have work, you do have school, you do have things that you need to get done. That perspective of the weekend is what makes Friday so much better. But then the Sunday Scaries comes around just 2 days later. And next thing you know, you're 12 years old and you're sitting on your couch and you think, oh my gosh, I have school this week. And even though you're off that day, even though you're doing the things that you want to do, that perspective of the week just has such a major effect on how your overall well-being is. And that's where the concept of anticipation comes into play, because this was actually the #1 predictor factor for my well-being analysis, for the factors that affect my well-being and that linear regression analysis I did from that questionnaire. And another study done on this as well looks at how the best part of a vacation is the process of planning it, where even just taking off to get to your destination, they've measured that a lot of people are happier in that instance than the entire vacation itself. And really just goes to show the impact of having positive anticipation on how your overall well-being is. Being excited for the week ahead. So what I could recommend in terms of this is plan your weeks. Look forward to the week ahead. Plan something that you know you want to do and be able to have that in your head so that it affects how that day is that you're currently living. So all 8 of these factors fall somewhere on the range between external to internal influences. As I mentioned before, while physiological needs and safety is much more of an external aspect where I just need food in order to accomplish how I feel. I just need to make it a little bit warmer in here because I'm cold right now. Aspects such as anticipation, that's much more internal. And all these factors from one end to the other, there's sort of a balance between what you need to find of what you could do to implement those in your life in order to achieve optimal well-being. And the goal that I'm looking at is essentially making an equation. I said I have 13 factors that had an R squared of 0.87, and those are 13 factors that can predict my happiness. But even those factors within themselves, I want to make them more specific. I want to look at exactly what you could do, create a checklist essentially of if I'm not at my optimal well-being, why am I not at my optimal well-being, and what can I do to improve that? And essentially getting that checklist, getting that equation of being able to predict how your well-being is overall just by answering those questions. So now, just to summarize, what can you do? Meet your needs. That's all you could say about having that physiological needs and safety. That's the basic aspect of it. By having that, then that sets you up for success. Build energy building habits. So one of the factors that I noticed, well, I said before that the amount of sleep that I get didn't affect how exhausted I was. 2 of the factors that did affect it was meat intake and dairy intake. Don't tell the vegans, but that had a major effect on how my energy levels were overall throughout that week. I used to think espresso made me very sleepy, and then through my linear regression analysis, I learned that it was the milk in it, not the espresso. But by having energy building habits, that allows you to have that sustained energy and go throughout the day. Attack your anxiety or train your brain through meditation. For relationships, evaluate the quality, recognize the dosage of the people that you spend your time around, build new connections, and allocate time for those that you do want to spend your time around. For hedonic resets and the Tetris effect, that's what you could do in terms of gratitude. Emotional variability, as I mentioned before, savor those songs, savor those memories, savor that favorite movie that you watch. My favorite movie, I make it a special time around my birthday where I get my birthday cake and I sit in my bed and watch it. And it is so good. Work towards your higher values and challenge yourself. Find that ultimate meaning that you're looking for and end the day by getting the things done that you want to get done. Even if it's simple, as long as you feel proud of yourself of what you got done, then that's all you need in order to help achieve the optimal well-being. And lastly, for anticipation, plan the things that you love to do and don't live your life as a Rebecca Black song. So as a 17-year-old who wanted to quantitatively see his life just day in, day out throughout numbers, and in the forms of graph, I never expected to get to the point that I am at right now. And I still have so much more research I want to do, so many more unanswered questions, and so many more factors that I want to figure out what affects happiness and all those factors that affect happiness and well-being. And how to improve that overall being instead of just being way less sad. But I do hope you enjoyed the talk. And if you excuse me, I have to go write down how happy I am on a scale from 0 to 10.